My Lords, it's a pleasure to follow the noble Lady Baroness Bakewell of Hartington Mandeville and to join the noble lady in commending the noble Lord Best and his expert collaborators in really tackling what is a huge issue for communities up and down the land, but particularly some of our most disadvantaged communities. And I think it's really important that we put this in the context of where we are now. Since the late 1970s, about half of all public land, 2 million hectares in total, has been sold from public into private, largely into private hands. That means the local government has 40% less land holdings than it did 4 decades ago. The NHS estate is down 70%. And what we've seen, as we've heard from other speakers in this group, is not just a loss of land, and people might or might not have ideological views about that, but a loss of capacity, facilities, access to local people, and just a simple destruction of what had been a public resource. And if I think of one of these that I visited a few years ago on the Isle of Wight, a particularly tragic tale, the Frank James Hospital, had been donated as a charity, beautiful big piece of land, sold 20 years ago to a developer, still sitting there rotting, a facility that the public had over decades, best part of a century, raised money for, put money into. It was a public facility, sold to a developer and now just sitting there rotting. Closer to us here, some noble lords may know Caxton Hall, which was a huge centre of historical interest, and, of course, a place to hold public meetings, at one point a fairly affordable place to hold public meetings in the vicinity of Westminster, something that anyone who's tried to organise one of those will know is a very rare breed indeed these days. Now, of course, private flats. So I think the noble Lord Best, and I would offer to do what I can to work with the noble Lord if he wishes to take this forward into the next stage of this bill, has hit on something really important here. We've lost space for political campaigning. We've lost space, I think, particularly for our young people. Those public spaces were often where young people gathered. Young people weren't surveilled and oversighted and expected to spend money, but it was just a public space for young people to gather. So much of that has been lost. And as I think the noble Lord Crisp said through the ventriloquism of the noble Lady Baroness Pinnock, this is very much a levelling up issue, because when you go to the poorer communities around our country, they often don't have the public spaces have been sold off, but they also don't actually have even private spaces that you could rent, because there's not enough money to support that kind of private space. So I think this is a really crucial issue to pick up in the Levelling Up Bill. Other than that, I will just briefly comment on the Government Amendment 165, which broadly conceding the principle of of choosing to dispose for less than best consideration is an excellent idea. I think the example that comes to mind, perhaps a police and crime commissioner deciding to give at very low, perhaps even peppercorn cost, a piece of land that might be used to build a youth centre on, that facility that we've so terribly lost in most parts of the country. That would clearly be potentially, for a police and crime commission directly serving their mandate, a very good thing to do. What worries me a little about this is the Secretary of State consent element of this, which is just one more centralisation. I do wonder if there shouldn't be some kind of a range of local and regional bodies having an input rather than it coming down to Westminster. But nonetheless, I will applaud some degree of progress anyway.